I feel like I've underperformed my potential. A feeling of mourning for that child, mourning that teenager who went through those struggles without achieving their potential, knowing that they didn't achieve their potential. When I was little, I was already kind of like the weird kid that always wanted to grow his hair long and wild. I had recently been diagnosed with ADHD. But my experience of ADHD was constant noise in my head. I didn't even know it was a thing.
Did you find that you were kind of losing a part of yourself, or did you simply see it as, you know what, this can still be a part of me?
Well, the thing is, I was born with a sort of a particular challenge, which was like very big brain, but it meant that without having to try too hard, I would perform well at school. Without having to try too hard, I could become a musician. So when I was at school, for example, and I get straight A's, that was not my potential. And in my world of sales coaching, they thought they were buying sales training. They had no idea they'd end up with a whole new system. They had no idea they would end up feeling elevated. And so I want to try and bring that to my network, the people that are close to me. And for me, that is where you're achieving your potential.
At what point do you stop performing for the world and start building a life that actually fits you? Today, I'm joined by David Chernick, a DJ, sales consultant, and someone who's lived on both sides of that line. From corporate conformity to embracing his full expression, we explore identity, self-awareness, and how a late ADHD diagnosis reshaped the way he understands himself and operates in the world. If you find value in this one, support the mission. Please kindly subscribe and leave a review. It helps the show grow, and that means that we can reach more men who are navigating that messy middle of growth and support them in becoming more self-led. Thank you so much. I'm Harrison, and this is the Growth Voyage Podcast. Enjoy. Got the red lights on. We'll get started. David, welcome to the show.
Yo.
Great to have you here. The way in which I wanted to start this was talking about your style and the way you carry yourself. It's very distinct and unique. And I wonder if you've always embraced that side to you, or whether there was a particular moment in time where you decided to really embrace who you were.
I would say it's more of a fallback than proactively embracing something. Yeah, it's like it's more of a comfort thing. I mean, when I was little, I was already kind of like the weird kid that always wanted to grow his hair long and wild. And listening to crazy music, doing slightly stupid things, very, very sort of active, always outside. It was before the days of mobile phones. It was like, have you got 10p in your pocket in case you need to phone home? And, my memories of like, there was a waste ground near where we lived, and we'd make a whole summer's play out of a discarded washing machine with our other retrograde mates from around the blocks and all of that kind of stuff. So I was generally mucky and dirty and late and somewhere unknown and outdoors. Summers went on for several years at a time. We lived in a cul-de-sac. We were always out in the street, and with the neighbours sort of screaming at us and running away and that kind of thing. So, so people do ask me about the style thing, the distinctive look. But it's more of a fallback. There have been some times in my life, in fact, two main ones, one in my 20s and one in my 30s for like a couple of years apiece, where I actually, forced myself into the required uniform. I was working in the corporate world. Yeah. So the required uniform was required. I started my life my working life really at IBM. and they had a dress code: dark blue suit or dark grey suit. Yeah, white or blue shirt. Okay, all of that kind of stuff. I had long hair, right? So I used to tie it back, cover it in, I was going to say spray paint, but the equivalent of, hairspray. And I looked pretty respectable. I looked like a nice, precocious young sales dude. And then my boss knew I DJ'd, and so I then did the IBM Christmas party, and I had my hair down, and nobody recognised me for the first half of the night. And they were like, "What? That's David Chernick." Yeah. So the cover has always been when I've had to put on a suit, and I still have clients where, it's not like a religious thing or anything. You need to get into the Lloyd's building if you do with insurance companies, and they have a dress code for the building. So there are places like that.
Well, it's an interesting point. I think there's two thoughts that came up in my mind there. One was like clearly like the contrast between, and by the way, I think that's a fantastic childhood, just outward looking in, just the sound of that. There's something so raw and organic about it. And those are times which it's quite rare we're going to get back, at least in the Western world anyway.
I'm still there. I'm an outdoorsy person now. I'm going camping off grid with a mate in a few weeks' time. It's only once a year though.
Yeah, that's another point as well. I feel like I'll usually save these types of expeditions and basically kind of detached from the world a bit. I'll save that for like summer or once or twice a year. And I'm thinking, is there actually a reality where this is just how you can live every day and you don't need to make it a one-off thing? I don't know.
Well, a good friend of mine, Neil Giller, who you probably should have on the show at some point, he'd say, them dreams, those you can do some of those things still. It's harder to find. In fact, the guy I'm going camping with is from America, and he arrived here 10 years ago, imagining that he would be able to, in the English country, be able to just pitch up tents anywhere. He grew up in an environment where it was, "Hey son, how'd you like to go fishing this weekend?" Yeah. So, he rocks up in Borehamwood, finds a local lake, decides to takes his fishing rod, and then promptly gets shooed away by the landlord or the club members. So he found out I'm a camper and asked where he can go camping. I pointed in the right direction, and then the following year we went away together. It's still not fully off grid, but when I was a kid, and probably even when you were a kid, you could go to a campsite and light a fire, and cook over that fire. Whereas now, you probably have to have a license to do that stuff, to be able to have a campsite where you're allowed to do that.
Yeah, it does seem like there are more restrictions. But I know in Australia, for example, we managed to find some great places there. I guess it's more ingrained in the culture. I was keen to touch upon this element, right? So you've had this kind of wild nature in your childhood as a kid, and then you move into this corporate world, and as you've kind of alluded to, it's this kind of corporate mask, if you like. So I'm keen to hear, did you find that you were kind of losing a part of yourself, or did you simply see it as, this can still be a part of me, just not one I fully embrace all of the time, and stemming on from that?
Well, the thing is, I was born with a sort of a particular challenge, which was like a very big brain. Yeah. So I don't credit myself with that. That was just, what I had. So, which obviously has a very good side as well. But it meant that, without having to try too hard, I would perform well at school. Without having to try too hard, I could become a musician. Without having to try too hard, I could pursue all different sorts of things. And it meant that, and also I was very lucky to have an amazing education. So that sort of took me down a path, not necessarily of my choosing, but, for example, maybe when I was about 10 years old, I said to my doctor auntie, who I was very close with, I want to be a doctor. Yeah. So there, without me having to even think about anything, there was a life course set out before me. Yeah. And I like sciencey stuff. Well, I like everything really, but I was good at science, maths and all of that kind of thing. So I went through a whole sort of science path, did the science A-levels, got a place to do medicine and all of that kind of stuff. And then, came to my senses and realised that, hang on a sec, I'm not 10. What do I actually want to do? And I always I started DJing when I was 15. So that's like, some people call that work. So I was working, bringing my own money. I was teaching a bit of piano. I had a job at the local, Circle K, like 7-Eleven. So I'd go out on a Saturday night, DJ or party, and then I'd go straight to Circle K to open up the store in the morning, put all the newspapers together and all of that kind of stuff, and did a shift there. So I was always doing a lot of stuff. Yeah. And getting A's in my grades and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, where did that come from then? It sounds, were you naturally quite, because you said there you've got naturally quite intelligent and crack on with things pretty easily. So
that's different. No, I've got a brain that works, but sort of cracking on with things is different. I think for me, I'm busy, yeah, and I wanted to get out, yeah.
So is that linked to maybe a high work drive, or is that slightly different to what you were? Because that's the impression I get, DJing and then going off to...
Look, there was conscientiousness in my family, yeah, so I'm conscientious, and in fact my wife is conscientious as a consequence of that. I've got 2 conscientious kids. However, I had recently been diagnosed with ADHD. Yeah. In fact, I'm high at the moment on those pills that they give you. So I'm sort of even now sort of looking back at my childhood and wondering what are the elements that put that together, because we're all made of multiple different facets and different ingredients, different life experiences, genes, all of that kind of stuff. And then you end up with this. And everything has its effect. So it's been sort of quite interesting, sort of, going back through the old chapters and reading that first chapter again and looking at it through different eyes. It's a little bit like, I once read a book. I don't know if you've had this experience. I once read a book and I mispronounced the name of one of the main characters all the way through the book. And then by the time I got to the end and somebody corrected me on the actual pronunciation of that name, I felt like I didn't know that character in the same way. It made me feel like I should read the book again. So it's that kind of, looking back on it, it's a bit like that. I'm still sort of discovering what that was all about, but I don't really have that much time to think about it that much. But
yeah, well, it's an interesting discussion, isn't it? I think when you look back at perhaps potential patterns, childhood, what have you, how it makes you into the man you are today, I think it's very exciting at first, and then, at least in my case, I kind of got a bit lost in there, and then you can start thinking, well, I had this perception of it, but then was that actually reality, or was that kind of my modern day view of things? The ADHD is interesting because you mentioned medication for that. How much of a difference has that made? And you mentioned conscientious, and is there a bit of a conflict there with taking something? Or,
I mean, I'm not anti-medication. I believe in science. Yeah. Although I didn't pursue a career in medicine. Yeah. I've got, I'm very, very interested in it, and I learn a lot about it. And when ADHD was first presented to me, as a possible, diagnosis for me around the dinner table, by one of my kids, it set me off on a little bit of a train. Oh, it's an interesting thing to hear about myself. So I do a bit of research, And then it was through a bit of a discovery. And actually, I do that kind of activity probably every 3 years or so, some sort of self-development thing. Yeah, some people can continuously self-develop. Yeah, that's too intense for me. So every 3 years or so, I'll do something. And it might be a therapy, it might be a course, it might be a new experience. Yeah, and this time it was ADHD.
Well, firstly, it's quite an interesting approach, isn't it? To kind of have seasons of your life where you go into self-development and then out with it again. I've never quite heard that before, because I've always looked at it as, okay, right, you're either growth-minded or it's not really your thing. And I've always thought, well, when you do concentrate on growth, on self-improvement, it's cool and exciting. And at the same time, it can also be challenging. That's why it's growth, right? It's pushing your limits on what you thought was possible. So I quite like that approach.
I like plateauing and just enjoying and living that period of time. Yeah, 2 or 3 years. I mean, each one of those 3 yearly things takes me about a year, really. Yeah. And it affects my mental health as well. And, so I go on a bit of a downer, and then it takes me a while to heave myself up. The Phoenix awakens sort of thing at the end of it. Yeah. So you've caught me just at that moment.
Wow. So you really leave time. Would you call it like an integration, essentially, where you're you're learning this stuff, you're going deeper within yourself, and then it's like, okay, right, let's integrate this for a bit, and then let's enjoy this state. Then, okay, let's find the next challenge.
Gosh, dude, you're very, very clever. I think that perhaps it is a little bit like, just from you saying that, maybe this is how it feels, that I'm kind of like putting that development period in a little bit of an icebox and doing it separate from, what I was, and then doing a sort of a first release, like a bit of software, and then a few patches after that. I think maybe that's kind of how I do it. And that's probably one of the reasons why, I go on a little bit of a downer in the build up to it. Yeah. And so whilst I'm doing those developments, it's usually, a little bit of a dark period of my life as I'm doing it.
Is that what triggers the exploration? Is it that because my initial perspective was actually, rather than it being a conscious choice, sometimes it's like, okay, life just happens. And then that, because we've gone into a down period, that's what. Yeah. Is that
you're absolutely right. Yeah. So that does trigger it, and it's a cyclical thing. It's a seasonal thing. And I if it didn't happen, would I go do these personal development things? I would hope I would, but perhaps not. Perhaps I need those sort of cyclical dips and troughs and stuff. And I actually, and a lot of people, I think, that have gone through not sort of traumas as in a bad event happening to you, but have sort of ongoing challenges. If you, and I do ask, because it's very, very relevant to all the work I do, would you change yourself? Would you, if you could turn back the clock, and bear in mind, I'm not talking about sort of individual terrible traumas that happen in a particular moment, but would you turn back the clock and then stop yourself having ADHD, for example? Or would you turn back the clock and then relive the last chunk of your life, but without having had a disability or something? And actually, when I ask, most people who I ask that of say no. There are, of course, whenever I say anything like that, people will say, well, but what about the case where you have this awful condition? I mean, there was, I've forgotten the name of it, but my school sort of adopted charity for part of the time I was at school was this terrible medical condition that you're born with, where your skin detaches from the underlying tissue. So you are covered in blisters, burn like blisters for your entire life. And the chances are that you will die of skin cancer in your 20s. Yeah, after a very painful life. Now, so I'm not going to that kind of extreme, I would imagine, I don't know, but if I was to say to a 20-year-old with that, take yourself back to 5, would you want to have, no, of course you wouldn't necessarily, but for my very minor, relatively, little struggles, no, I wouldn't change that life course. Also, what most people do when they have challenges, if they have been able to get through life to a degree, is that, they'll have developed some workarounds, some accommodations for themselves, as I have done. I didn't realize until not that long ago that well-organized people didn't have like an obsessively full, intricate diary. Right? I thought that's what organized people do. But no, it turns out that organized people don't necessarily have to have more in their diary than other people. Me, though, to be able to get through life, I have to have everything in my diary. Yeah.
Me too.
And that's not an uncommon thing, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to, be doing what I'm doing unless I had been able to organize myself. It's a workaround. Nobody taught me, but I realized sort of quite early on that if I wanted to, I was a sales guy, right, in my early career. And if I wanted to rock up to an appointment and close a deal, well, you've got to be there on time. And as it happens, my grandfather particularly was notoriously early for stuff. He would get to a train station in time to get the previous train. And I think I know why now. He didn't have a diary. I think he was barely literate, actually. He went to a special needs school, as it happens. Yeah, back in the day, they didn't call it special needs school. The school he went to was for delicate children. I mean, he was far from a delicate man. But so why was he like that? Well, that was probably his workaround to make sure that he, didn't screw up his life.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know my father, he always gets everywhere super early, like half an hour at least, sometimes an hour. And I asked him, I was like, why do you, have you always been like this? He's like, no, I used to be super late to everything. So now he's got in full circle. It's a very inefficient way of spending your time. Yeah. Getting there an hour or half an hour early. Do you think this is all linked to ADHD? And I want to explore this a bit more because you hear this, like it's a superpower, and I've been meaning to get a test done myself. It's just on my to-do list. It's not going to to-do lists because
it was lucky it came up in my life at a time when I was ready to do something about it, frankly.
And because it came up for you quite late, right?
Yeah.
Then it's interesting because on the surface, when you list all the stuff you were doing, it sounded like you were quite efficient on the surface. And so what I would like to dig into is it a superpower, as people say it is? It's been something I've tried to look into for myself. The only thing that resonates with me is that I can go down these deep spirals of thinking, and my creativity and imagination, it's great, and it's something that I really relish. And then I also kind of look at, and again, I haven't been tested yet, but I'm just looking at the way my mind works and organizes itself. I also notice there's a bit of chaos in quite a few places. So from your understanding, is it a superpower? Can it be
I mean, look, I'm not a psychologist. I have studied it in depth as part of my own thing, but I'm, always very conscious that I have my own lived experience. And, if you think that, I don't know, 10% of people are neurodivergent in some way, shape or form, they're all different. We're all different. I've done so much work over the years with people who are neurodivergent. I've kind of like become a bit of a specialist in in treating people like individuals and figuring out with them what their challenges are and what and what workarounds we need to build in order to accommodate their challenges so that they can perform to the best of their ability. Now, I had a cover which was my intelligence, right? So when I was at school, for example, and I get straight A's, yeah, that was not my potential. Yeah. However, well, he's on A's, so he's all right. Okay. Now, if you, do you have kids?
I don't.
So for people that have kids that send them into education, less so now, but certainly it's a commonplace for people to wonder where their child is in the rankings of performance at school. Is he top of the class? Is he bottom of the class? Is he in the middle somewhere? Right? However, that's not particularly useful for that kid, because you could be top of the class, but radically underperforming your potential. You could be bottom of the class and absolutely hitting every target that you could possibly set yourself, yeah, to perform to the best of your ability, right? And so, and you know, decent educators these days absolutely understand all of that, and the measures that we have in schools to measure the teaching performance is all geared around that. You know, we have value-added scores that, you know, a lot of people dismiss or minimize, including some teachers. But, you know, that's really, those are the sorts of measures that we're looking for. So I feel like I've underperformed my potential, right? Which is a burden. And it's also on discovering that that's what's happened, as in once I got a diagnosis, and this isn't unusual, a feeling of mourning. Mourning for that child who underperformed, who didn't live to their potential. Mourning that teenager who went through those struggles without achieving their potential, knowing that they didn't achieve their potential, believing of themselves that they are, I don't know whether it's something. I heard somebody the other day, actually, close to me, who thinks of himself as, his worry is, am I just lazy and stupid? Yeah. So, you know, all of those opportunities that you could have shone, lost.
Yeah, there's quite a few examples I can think just of what you mentioned there of guys I know, and yeah, it usually spirals them into real tough challenges mentally, because they've always been the high performer, and that's been their whole identity, right? They've got scholarships to great schools, they won races, they've always been that guy. And then and on the surface, you're looking at him and you're going, oh, but you've done all this stuff, you've done this. But in their eyes, it's not good enough.
Well, it feels to me a little bit like when, I forgot the dude's name, there was a famous footballer a few years ago died by suicide, right? And I remember hearing my brother-in-law, he had everything to, what on earth could he be so down about? Yeah. Now, we understand now that the two, you know, aren't necessarily linked. You can have a mental health problem and up from the outside, you're on top of your game. What possible, you know, cause could there be for you to be so depressed? And yet we know now, you know, most people know that, that you can absolutely still be suffering inside.
But it's interesting because from what you described there, my first instinct was they are performing well. Mm-hmm. It's just their perception of it. But then from the sounds of it, actually, there could be an instinct within them which is right, based off of your story, which is actually, no, I know I can do better. And I think that's something I resonate with a little bit. Like, if I remember, I'll be speaking to my girlfriend about this. She'll say, yeah, but high performer, yeah, and in my mind, it's just like, yeah, but I know I can do so much more.
I would say that it's worth finding out. Yeah. You know, there's debates with not just ADHD, with all sorts of different things. Should I get a diagnosis or shouldn't I? Yeah. What am I going to gain by doing? Why am I doing it? You know, and I can only, as I say, speak for myself, and also I can speak for a lot of people who I deal with about these sorts of challenges, because I've been working in it for years. That I think that I mean, I've always thought that self-awareness is like the killer app in a lot of the things that I end up helping people with. It's like their sales, their parties and stuff like that, right? The moments of truth in their lives. Having self-awareness, I think, is a killer app, because then you know what tools you've got to play with. Yeah. And then all you have to do is learn how to harness those tools. Just to bring it down to earth a little bit, with my clients, and they're all different. They all have their different challenges. They've all got their different strengths. I'm a bit selective about who my clients are. So they've all got something very cool to bring. But once they become aware of the things that are really holding them back, then we can make decisions about whether we are going to create some workarounds. For example, get someone else to do those things, or whether it is even worth trying to improve their skills, or doing a bit of both. Let's get your skills up a little bit. Like for me, I think of my ADHD medication as really to sort out my admin. That's why I'm not taking it to help me DJ a gig. I'm not taking it to help me close a deal. I'm not taking it to, do a client engagement, and they're all sort of very, I work very hard in order to get great results for my clients in every respect. And I'll go anywhere to do it. People present to me in my sales business, oh, we need some sales training. Yeah. But, skills in sales is just a part of a whole load of other things, and not even the most influential part in how successful people are at selling. Yeah. So they might have to have a whole different system for them in order to do it. Now, bearing in mind how many people have different sorts of challenges and how our brains are all wired all differently, you will find, in all likelihood, a way that will work for you, and probably a choice of different ways that will work for you. But to your point, knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are, knowing where your challenges lie, yeah, that I think is generally a useful thing. Early in my career, after IBM, I worked at a place called Gartner Group. It's like they call themselves the world's leading authority on IT. Yeah, it's an analyst company. Brainy people that understand all elements of technology, the business side of it, strategy, the techie stuff, all of that. And there was a bit of a mantra there. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Yeah, a whole big slug of the stuff I was selling there, the services I was selling, was like measurement tools. Let's measure what your IT is doing in your business. Let's measure where you're spending your money on IT. And get this, the amount of money that you'll spend on the kit itself, the computers and the software, that's probably just the 10% of the total cost of ownership. It's a similar amount of cost if you're in a business with lots of employees. It's a similar cost to buying the stuff as it costs you for when you say, yo, Harrison, can you come over here and show me how you print that thing? Yeah, and you come over, and then Christy comes over as well. And I might go around. Add that all up, that's the same amount that you've spent on the kit. Yeah, so being able to measure stuff helps you make good decisions.
And I imagine that's the issue a lot of kids have, whereas there's this one system or way about doing things. And as you were saying, everyone's got different brains, patterns, what have you, different experiences, and yet trying to fit them into this one mold. I can imagine that, brings many limitations, not just of what you do, but then also how you see yourself and the world and what you believe is possible.
Yeah, look, there's the typical range. Yeah, and, because everybody talks with all these different things, they say, well, we're all on the spectrum. And of course, we are all on the spectrum, various spectrums. But there is a typical range, yeah? And it is the typical range for which, most systems and structures and, communities, society is set up to accommodate most comfortably, yeah? Because it doesn't need to be that personalized for it to be pretty much everybody's going to be cared for in this environment. But the people who are outside of that typical range, and it's sort of arbitrary where you set those levels, those limits, those ranges, but it's not going to be as accommodating for them. And there's a good example that I use quite a bit when I'm thinking of these things, and when I'm confronted by these challenges from my clients that, you know, want to do things the normal way. Yeah. I see that company, my competitor, doing it like that. That's how I want to do it. Yeah. So you've heard of the condition OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, how many times have you heard somebody, or maybe even said yourself, "Oh, I'm so OCD." You know, you hear it all the time. "Oh, did I close the front door? I'm so OCD. Oh, I have to wash my hands. So OCD." But, you know, there are people that suffer from OCD, but it's still a spectrum. So at what point do you say that that is a disorder? And it's an arbitrary point. And I think, you know, I don't know if this is the case, 'cause I'm not a doctor, but I think, you know, if it was something that would interfere with 20% of your day, you know, then you start thinking, well, actually, this is holding me back. Yeah. If it's just like me and every so often I get slightly raw knuckles, like that could be from punching as much as washing my hands, you know, that's not OCD. Yeah. I'm slightly obsessive about washing my hands. But if I couldn't do anything unless I'd washed my hands multiple times, or I couldn't leave the house for an hour because I was having to check the door, or I was arriving at a train station an hour too early, yeah, that's going to cost me some of my life. So, you know, some people I know will want to go really in depth and really understand themselves, and there won't necessarily be that much payoff because they won't be able to put it into practice. And, you know, that's their prerogative. For me, you know, I want to be able to be, you know, more sort of good enough to be able to do what I want to do.
I see.
Yeah, I don't want my life to be, you know, defined by self-improvement.
Which I imagine is quite an easy trap to get in. It's like life for living at the end of the day, isn't it? So,
you know, I mean, I really experience the miracle of life. I feel it deeply. And, you know, and so, and then the other side of it is, of course, the more you do on your self-development, the less energy you have to help others develop as well. So if you are in a service industry, as I am, really, as you are, we all arguably are, if we have customers or if there's other people that are going to benefit from the work that we do, then, you can do a certain amount of navel gazing, but at some point, you know, what are you contributing?
Oh, it's interesting though, because if we take like that example, let's say, I know you coach other people with their challenges, that's going to be quite a big step for some people to actually seek support or to be coached. For a lot of people, that's quite a big step. And so if they're going to be in that position to make that step and improve themselves, then I imagine the person that they're going to be looking to for support, if you're embodying that yourself, then that sends some type of message out there as well, I presume. It's kind of setting an element of kind of setting, not so much an example, but that's the way I would kind of look at that from that perspective. It's
certainly more convincing when you get given advice by somebody who's lived it. Yeah. But I don't think is the only way you can do it. You know, I mean, you could see a doctor that would be an expert in treating a particular condition, yeah, that has never had that condition. Yeah. And I'd rather get my advice from that doctor than from somebody who has neither the lived experience nor the expertise and just read it in a book, or as these days happens, got it off the internet, you know. And when AI is using other AI agents as its source, you know, there's a lot of people out there that believe, more so than there ever has been, that believe they have an authority, yeah, and they don't. They don't, but they speak authoritatively. And the other thing is just because somebody has had a lived experience, you know, again, their advice might not be right for you, even if on the face of it, it looks like you've had a similar kind of problem. Yeah. And so, this is a big part of industry. This is an industry in itself. I got through my problem like this. Who else has got that problem? You, right? Okay, I'll show you how I did it. Yeah, that's legit. That's absolutely fine. But I'd rather that person also, in getting out of their problem themselves, had also got a bit more of a rounded knowledge of what that all meant. Yeah, how it was that they came to have that problem, and why it is that other people have that problem too. Maybe a little bit of science about it. Maybe a little bit of, I don't know, rock and roll about it. So that's where this, but that's where I think the more successful consultants and coaches have, where they mash a couple of things up together. That mash up.
Yeah, kind of taking bits and pieces of each one.
So when I walk into a corporate client now, and they'll all be suited and booted and everything, and then like the chief executive meets me at the lift because he wants to parade me through the office because so this is how serious I am. I'm getting that weird looking guy in. You know, that is like a it's perhaps even a useful routine for them. Yeah, you realise that I'm in business now, but it also means that that consultant that has that kind of mashup, those two, or more even, but those two bits that come together that create a slightly different platform for delivering their message. That yes, of course, is relatable to the recipient of the advice or the coaching, but also brings some other element into it. Yeah, in the green room before we were talking about a gig I DJ'd a couple of weeks ago, and I can either tune it. I can tune in to the crowd. If you think what a DJ skill, really a party DJ, it's you're tuning into people, and I can either give them a pleasant ride all the way through. Everything feels natural, or I can help them experience something new by mashing into it something that they hadn't ordered. An amuse-bouche, if you will. Or, I don't know if you know anything about magic, but I come from a magic family background. The prestige, which is the bit after the trick's been done. And then, it was in your pocket all along, the extra bit. Yeah, the extra, the thing that nudges you, that jolts you. Yeah, and in my world of sales coaching, they thought they were buying sales training. They had no idea they'd end up with a whole new system. Yeah? They thought they were getting a DJ to DJ their party, to play some nice music. They had no idea that they would end up feeling elevated with all of their guests reinvested in the next chapter of their life. They didn't order that. And so I want to try and bring that to my network. Yeah, the people that are close to me. And for me, that is where you're achieving your potential. Yeah, when you get into that sweet spot that, we say to our kids, do your best. Just always do your best. I mean, it's very hard to maintain doing your best the whole time. I defy anybody to be able to do that. Yeah, unless you are an elite athlete or an elite, business leader. Yeah, I ain't that. And I'm just a regular guy, and I don't know if I could live like that. That sort of the sacrifices that those sorts of people have to make. Yeah. So you don't need to be doing your best at every moment. I don't want you to have to do that. I want it to feel natural. Just feel like your full expression of Harrison. This is the full expression of me living my life. I get to the end of my life, I'll be like, yeah, I lived that. It wasn't perfect. I got some scars.
Well, the question then becomes, how can one really embody that fullest expression of themselves while living in the world that we live in with systems in place? And again, there's this whole thing about output, right? We're so busy, there's always something to do, and then you'll hear, just slow down and just embrace it. And then the reality is, okay, nice idea, and I'm incorporating that, but then I've also got this other stuff to do. So is that something that you've felt the tension of trying to, it sounds on paper like you have embodied
Doesn't
that.
it just? Doesn't it just? It does sound on paper. And even to myself, sometimes it feels like I have. However, and I experience tremendous feelings of fulfillment. Yeah. But those feelings of fulfillment that I get are the successes of the people around me, the clients that I have, for example. Yeah. The fulfillment has not arrived in terms of my own achieving my potential. So, you know, that's a painful thing. Yeah, it's a burden in some ways. Saying that, of course, you know, I mean, I can't speak for you, but it certainly seems like you live in a lap of privilege relatively. Yeah. And so for the likes of you and I, and for the most of the people I deal with on a day-to-day basis, you know, that thought of, you should just sit back and, you know, take it all in and just be myself a little bit. You know, a lot of people, maybe most people in the world, don't have the luxury to be able to do that. You know, there's still, I don't know, 2/3 of a billion people in the world that live in abject poverty, right? Where all the money they earn has to be spent on food and they're always hungry. You know, I don't know what that is, $2 a day. Probably have to look up the World Health Organization figures on, you know, so it's a lot of people. Now, just sit back, you know, just take it all in. You know, it's just not, and that's for them. There's still billions more that don't have that. You know, if you even just walk down Bournemouth High Street and you see that there's countless people who don't have the ability to do that, the luxury to do that. So really, you know, you have to kind of like temper all of that. Well, I try anyway. I try and temper my own feelings of dissatisfaction with, you know, continuous sort of gratitude for, thank God I've got this. Thank God I could get a psychiatrist appointment to get my diagnosis. Thank God I knew about right to choose. Yeah. Thank God I've got the wherewithal to have some sort of awareness about what's going on. Thank God, you know, I have a safety net. Yeah. When I go and see a lot of families for their kids' parties, their bar mitzvahs and things, you know, quite often whatever challenges the kids have got, you know, and I ask them, where have they got this from? Both of you, if there's both of them, you know, and they'll have the similar sorts of challenges. So, you know, the experience that some people have, I'm going to do an assessment. It's a little bit like when I go into a business, I'll do a diagnostic. But what if the person that you're giving that diagnostic, that assessment to, doesn't have the capacity to act on it? Yeah, they can't advocate for their kid, but they can't advocate for their client. They can't let alone advocate for themselves. Yeah, so what I try and coach into my clients, and it might be again a case of, you know, where consultants are always trying to like sort out their own problems by channeling it through what they're offering their clients. Yeah, and that brings into the cobbler's children thing. You know, oh, you're selling me shoes. How come your kid's not got shoes? Yeah, or you ask any builder, they've got a list of jobs magnetized to their fridge of the stuff that they haven't done in their house. Look at inside a dentist's mouth next time you go and see the state of their teeth. Why is it that so many doctors smoke compared to the rest of the population? Why is it the marketing people are hopeless at marketing their own stuff? So, you know, there's, you know, going back to what you had said about, you know, using your own lived experience and coming out the other end to then bestow that knowledge on others without having like a proper deep understanding, whether it's an academic understanding or some philosophical understanding or a practical understanding. Yeah, it's all very well for you to say to somebody, or for me to say to somebody, well, what you've got to do is like get out those spreadsheets and buy yourself a CRM system. And, you know, sure, I can tell them to do that. You know, sales training. The reason why sales training has a very low ROI, and I worked in corporate as an employee for many years. I bought that stuff, right? And it's generally sales training. Have you ever done sales training?
Yeah.
Right. It's the trainer, usually a very charismatic kind of person. Yeah. They've got stories to tell, war stories that excite you. And maybe you want a 1 hour course or a 2-day course or whatever it was. and you come out all pumped up. Oh, wow, I learned so much from that. I'm going to definitely put that into practice. I've got the workbook, everything. You wait. Get back to work. Right, now I've been on that course for a couple of days, so I've got a little bit of catch up. I'm going to keep that manual, that workbook right there. Just going to do some follow-up stuff that I missed. 200 emails, phone calls, okay. So, okay, it's the first day back. I know I didn't touch it, but it's staying right. In fact, I'm going to put it on top of my keyboard. I won't be able to come in tomorrow without ignoring it. Yeah, but then the next day happens, and maybe you flick through the first couple of pages. Anyway, another email pops in, and you've got follow-up to do on them. That one didn't close. This one's causing you probably, whatever. Yeah? Your partner's got a cold. Just life. That workbook ends up on a shelf, usually, and I see it. I get hired into a gig at a client, and I'm being paraded through their office, and this is the sales team. Meet David Chernick. He's going to be with us for a little while. And I look at their shelf. Oh, you've done spin selling. Oh, you've done major account selling. Oh, you've got the workbooks. You've done it all. Why am I here? Oh, well, we didn't put it into practice. Yeah. So unless you are in an environment where somebody can like advocate for you and make sure that you are empowered to execute on those things, and that can include things like accountability and cracking the whip and, you know, all of that stuff as well, and should, then it's never going to happen. And if you are a micro business or a one-man band, or if you're just left on your own because you've got a shit manager, you're going to have to be able to advocate for yourself and get the support that you need. Yeah, I was talking to somebody very, very recently who confessed that when people talk to him, all he really hears is blah, 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 right? He needs people to speak slower with shorter sentences and to emphasize specific words. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist or I'm not that. I'm a sales guy, right? I'm helping him close deals. So that's why I've gone there, because that stands in the way of that person closing deals. Now, the accommodations to make for that are minor and easy. Yeah. If we do it for somebody in a wheelchair, the law had to change though, so that a shop can accommodate the custom of somebody who's wheelchair bound by putting a little bit of easy. Yeah. But, so difficult to do that. Yeah. Speak slower. Yeah. I'm your sales guy. If you want to get the best out of me, the best deals, the best service, the best advice, do me a favor. Could you speak slowly? Also, I'm going to take some notes here just because I won't stay in my head. Yeah. I'm an expert at DJ controller units. I'm an expert at air conditioning. Right. But do me a favor. Just what's most important to you about this? Why do you want it? What did you say? Right. I'm just going to write that down. I'll read it back to you as well. Now, the customer of that might be huffing and puffing out of lack of patience. However, a few things will happen there. One is that customer's more likely to get what they want. That customer also is going to feel heard all the way through. Yeah, because that guy is going to be repeating back word for word what they've just heard you to say. Now, here's the thing. One of the biggest complaints about salespeople is they just don't listen. Yeah, they just don't listen. I mean, have you ever heard anybody, not you're in sales, but just in life, Harrison, you're just not listening? It's a common experience. Now, what's interesting about that is you probably have heard what they've said. I mean, you might not agree with it. You might have an alternative view, but their impression is you just didn't even hear them. So that little trick that is the accommodation for the person that can't take in information as rapidly is instantly applicable to everybody else. All the normal people benefit. Yeah. So generally what I have found and what I find gets people the best performance is all of the other things, not just my own lived experience, all of the other things that come into my sphere, into my profession, yeah, my chosen field, the thing that pumps my nag, that gets me going. I love those moments of truth. In my case, it might be, you know, I don't know, sucking poo out of blocked drains, whatever it is. But for me to be able to deliver that to the masses, or unblock drains for everybody and improve their lives, nice flushing toilet, that smell, to be able to figure out all of the different ways that I'm going to be able to serve my target audience, that is very, very useful. And that is also helped by AI. However, the whole tuning in thing is still very much in the human domain. And so what we're doing here is we're leaning into our human in order to be able to do those things. I know, a long answer.
Yes.
But my pills are wearing off now, so.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, there are so many tangents to explore underneath all of that. I think what sticks out to me is, I think in particular, the moment where you are able to kind of start leading yourself in a way by actually, rather than just kind of following the script or societal norms, like the example you gave there, just stopping someone and just saying, can you repeat that back slower? Can I just take notes? I can relate to that earlier on in my journey, where I'd feel like, okay, it'd be so much easier if I just asked them to slow down, or asked them to repeat something, or asked a question. But because I had a fear of looking stupid, I just didn't do that. And then it would always just come back to eat me in the arse anyway when I wouldn't know what to do. So I think
it's just nuts, isn't it? And these accommodations are usually small. There's a lot of people that, I think of them a little bit like, people that still believe COVID is a hoax, still think that, I don't know, Elvis did 9/11 or something. The conspiracy theorists, and there are people who think that, neurodivergence isn't real. But it doesn't matter whether they think it's real or not. If people have the experience of not being able to perform to their best because their brain is wired in a different way, then they can do something about it. And it's not such an arduous thing for everybody else to make those little accommodations. They're usually pretty small accommodations, and they're, for me, they're no more difficult or more uncomfortable, those accommodations, than jumping into a cold swimming pool. You want to go swimming? Fine. It's going to be cold when you first jump in. Brace yourself. You're going to be fine. That's most of the changes do not involve a huge, arduous journey and great pain to accomplish.
And you mentioned before how you were kind of grieving, in a way, grieving this.
I said that a bit quickly.
Yeah,
bypass that. But go on in.
Well, it was essentially how, you kind of had this potential that you didn't quite meet. And then what I'm keen to explore before we move into the close is, because obviously you can tell like the passion you have for this subject and different brain patterns. So how much of a struggle for it was all of this for you? Like, did you before, because with it being such a recent discovery, I can imagine at the time there was this big kind of breakthrough moment. That makes sense. Now I can put some systems in place. But before then, how much of a toll did it actually take on you, like emotionally, mentally, kind of not really knowing what was going on, or were you so unaware of it?
I was unaware of it. However, I still had like deep, depression, anxiety, not just caused by that, but definitely I attribute a lot of it to it. In fact, it's not uncommon for people to get a diagnosis in this or anything, and then that to be the trigger to completely alleviate their other mental health challenges. Yeah. I mean, there's often, I've done quite a bit of work in the past volunteering-wise with things like, welfare. On a local basis, I'm heavily invested in Bournemouth, so, I get involved. And, when I look at the data, somebody that might present with a financial hardship issue, it's often not a standalone thing. There's often something else going on. somebody presents with a substance abuse problem. It's often not the only thing. There's often something else. There's like a sort of a comorbidity. And so, so there's usually a few different things going on, and some are more influential than others. But certainly, if you have my experience of ADHD was constant noise in my head. Constant noise in my head. Did I even think that other people didn't? I didn't even know it was a thing. And then once the idea had been put to me, and I started doing my own research, and I started talking to others about that, I self-medicated on one of these pills. And it was a profound experience. I don't know if you've ever been in an exam hall where it's full of kids doing exams and it's dead quiet. Ever been in a really quiet exam room? And then the air conditioning gets turned off and it goes to a whole new level of quiet. It felt like that to me. I can remember the music I was playing at the time, and I was driving, and I realised, actually, as the person who I took the drug off phoned me, have you noticed anything yet? And I wasn't expecting to notice anything, certainly not instantly, because my experience of medication, which has generally been for anxiety and depression, is it's like a slow burner. Is it working? Is it started working yet? Is it, I don't know. Whereas this was straight away. It was like probably half an hour after I took it, and I got a call from that person. Well, have you noticed anything? And as they said it, literally the only thing I had in my head was the tune that was playing and me driving. It was like a moment of peace. And so when I then presented myself to my doctor and said, yo, I've been looking at all this different stuff. I just self-medicated on these pills. I'd like to have an assessment. That was like, that began a development journey. So you were asking about the grieving, but then you asked about what it was like being in that previous space. So I didn't know that other people weren't like that. I didn't realize that, this was just me. I did probably have moments when I thought, why am I like this? But I never really thought about that, to be honest with you. Surprisingly, perhaps, because of how many of my clients have it. And then the way it came out was that I sat around the dinner table with a family, and I raised the fact that some of the characteristics I commonly see amongst these, and it's not just, by the way, in my events business. It's in my sales consultancy. I've had a referral I got called out of the blue from somebody in the South Island of New Zealand. I have got a neurodivergent sales force, I've just realised. Yeah, can you help? I must have written a blog or something, or been interviewed or something. It came out and it appeared in a search result for them. So, if you can improve it, then, and you want to, and you're motivated to living your best life and achieving your potential, then you can do that, but you've got to be able to measure it first. So when it was brought to my attention then, and I was going to say that how it came out. So I said, well, I see some of those characteristics in you. And they said, well, Dad, that is you, actually. You have all of those. Ooh. Yeah. But if she hadn't said that, I don't know. She's a medical student now. She credits herself with me being her first diagnosis.
Oh, well, that's something. That's quite something. You mentioned there you're also battling anxiety, depression. So in your mind, was symptoms of ADHD, is there a possibility that you saw that more as like, oh, that's just linked to the other stuff? Is that why do you think there wasn't a correlation?
There is definitely. I think that's pretty intuitive. I think that was certainly part of it. I also attributed and do attribute the mental health challenges with particular trauma. But that's obviously only part of it. Things are multifaceted. One of the most common questions I get asked by people who are not my clients is, David, tell me, what is the main thing? What's the big thing I should be doing in my business to improve my sales? And the answer is there is no one big thing. It's an accumulation of different things and it's the same thing. You know, I'm like intelligent enough to realize that mental health is not just caused by one particular trigger most of the time. I think that ADHD definitely made me very vulnerable to it.
I think that this whole discussion, it kind of just opens your eyes a bit. As you were saying, it's kind of your norm, or you don't know what other reality there is. And so you're kind of just living every day. And you mentioned it was like silence. You were just present in a way. And I can imagine that brought a lot of relief. At the same time, did you ever find that kind of stifled your creativity in a way?
That's such a good question. I have been asked that literally today. And other people have said that about their own experiences. You know, they find that maybe it dumbs them down or something like that. I have not experienced that. You know, I do a consultancy assignment. I have regular, you know, we call it the Treacle Club. You know, people join us on 1 hour. It's like their sales meeting every week, and they put them through and they have to report their numbers. How are we going to improve that? How are we going to close that? All of that kind of stuff. And they end up closing deals straight away. It's brilliant. With sales, there's an immediate payoff. Yeah, it's not like you have to wait for marketing to. So I personally, and I'm doing that on the drugs. Yeah, so I personally don't feel different. I've DJ'd gigs on it and not on it. The time for me where it does have an impact, and during the titration of these drugs, which I've only recently finished, I addressed this with my psychiatrist, was when you're in the time between when the drug wears off and when you've been on it. Yeah. So the first type of drug they tried me on, I would experience like a pretty rapid crash. I thought it was a crash. And then when I told the prescribing nurse, that's a crash. Uh-huh. Now, if that happens at a particular moment, like, for example, the moment when I'm kicking off a party, yeah, that's not very helpful for me at all. So, you know, so it's a case of trying to figure out what is the best for the individual. You know, all of our body chemistry is going to be different. Our brain wiring is going to be different. You know, I'd encourage people, if they want to go down that route, to do it with a proper medical professional. You know, I know a lot of people that pop pills randomly when they think they need it and all that kind of stuff. You know, I'm a grown up though. I need to be able to live my life in an organized kind of fashion so that at the time when I choose, I can do a stage dive without breaking my neck. Yeah, I am an active DJ. So often I'm standing on my decks, on my desk where my decks are. Yeah. So what does that mean? If I want to be able to do that, have the freedom to express myself like that, then that desk has to be strong enough to accommodate my weight, not just the weight of the controller, the decks. Yeah. So to be able to plan for those things helps me express things. To have the safety nets helps me be myself. If you're in business and you want to express yourself and become absolutely minted through, you know, delivering your passion to other people to enrich their lives, whatever it is that you're doing, then if you want to be free to do it in the Harrison way, in the David Chernick way, in whatever way it is, then it pays you to have, you know, I think of it as my admin sorted out. Yeah, just as a steady base that I can rely on. I always know that that is going to work for me. And whether that is my ability to invoice people or whether that is my ability to be able to, you know, get to appointments on time. Yeah. If I want to be delivering my treacle stuff, which gets huge positive feedback, it's insane. Then I have to have those other areas of my life taken care of, even though to me they're boring. To me, they're not my passion. Yeah. It's like it's a hygiene thing.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, just tying in this whole podcast, actually, whether the whole theme is, again, becoming the fullest expression of yourself. Would you say that a big part of that journey is by, getting your fundamentals, just making sure your fundamentals are in place? Is it as simple Is that perhaps?
I think it is that, but I don't think that is a simple thing. You know, I think tried and tested formulas can help. You know, we met doing networking. Yeah. I love being with people. Networking is great. It's all good fun. However, it's going to take up some of my time. And if I'm doing it during the time when I am working, I want it to contribute to the work I'm doing. Yeah. So I have to have it in a structured way. Otherwise, it's just a cup of tea in the chat. Yeah. And I'll do that with my mates or my family. So, you know, to have that base level is important. And when I said earlier on that, you know, people often present to me, not when they've been referred, but when they found me, we need some sales training, you know, and it's a bit like turning up to the doctor saying, I need some antibiotics. And the doctor, well, hang on a sec, can I look down your throat first? Can we just take a... Yeah. And so you want to be able to get like a solid foundation, even in the stuff that's boring to you. Yeah. I notice it a lot with, and this is an analogy I use. If a lot of young guys these days want to have the big muscles, right? The reason why most of them don't have it, even though they want it, is two things. Firstly, they just don't go and exercise those muscles. And secondly, they don't optimize that exercise. Yeah. They want the biceps. You're going to have to like core, get those elbows in. I mean, I don't do that. So, you know, but I know about, you know, self-defense. Of course, you want to look like Bruce Lee or you want to defend yourself against a stab attack in the street, but there's a whole load of ingredients, boring ingredients, the grind. Yeah. I planted a couple of fruit trees in my back garden. For them to produce fruit at the speed I wanted them to, I had to spend 2 years digging the earth. It's boring. You know, and some people can manage to turn that into an enjoyable habit. And in some cases I can. It's like a sort of a meditative experience. But when somebody comes to me and they've got sales training, I want to improve my skills, and then I say, take a step back and a sec, but there's no point in you having sales skills because you've got nowhere to put the data. Where are you going to, that thing that you're going to have to do, write down word for word what they said to you so they know you've heard them, and so you have actually heard them, and so you know what the heading of your quote should be, your proposal. Yeah. Why are you getting this aircon? Because my baby can't sleep at night, and that's ruining the sex life between me and my husband. We're going to get divorced any minute. That's why we need it, right? So the heading of that proposal is make sure you have a happy sex life and don't get divorced when your child is young. That is what it's for. Yeah, you cannot do that unless you've got somewhere to write it. You cannot write it down in just one place if you're going to have more than one customer. You have to have a whole system. Yeah, and if you have challenges that make it difficult for you to have a system, so you're going to have a workaround to make sure it's useful.
Yeah, it all comes down to you at the end of the day. So I think no one else is going to come up to you and say, right, here you go, here's everything you need, you should look into this, you should look into this. I think if you're determined to make a change or a difference in your life or get your stuff in order, then that's down to you. And then I think if you do just make that intention in your life, take charge of your own life, then yeah, the framework will kind of present itself to you.
I think so. And it's probably a reason why sales training is shit and doesn't work. Yeah. You need to be coached. It's all very well being able to read a book. Yeah. Some people can learn like that and put into action, but most of us can't.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of nuances that go into this stuff, for sure. Well, we've covered quite a lot of ground.
Thanks, man.
This episode.
Yeah.
It's been awesome, especially cool. Just talking about ADHD in particular. I think a lot of it's spoken about quite a lot these days, although there's still some nuances about it. So it's been cool to hear not only about your perspective on it, but also like your story as well and how you kind of navigated it.
Your questions have been great. They've been great. There were questions in there I've never been asked. I've been asked a lot.
Awesome. Glad to hear that, brother. What we'll do, we'll head into the closing traditions to round off today's podcast. The first two questions are routine. They're asked every week by myself. And the third one is asked by a member of the Growth Voyage community, one of our listeners of the show. They don't always know who the guest is when they ask the question. But the first question...
I should have asked you what this was going to be.
Well, yeah,
but there we go. Go on.
It's all live, keeping you on your toes. First one, you might actually find this quite tricky considering your experiences so far, but it's a song suggestion for the audience.
Right here, because I don't have favourites, right here, right now, I would be playing Tom York's Bloom. In fact, the version that he did for the Blue Planet 3.
Really? I thought you were about to say Right Here, Right Now by Fatboy Slim. But yeah, okay. We'll check that out. We'll put it in the description.
Yeah, it's a really good track.
Yeah. Awesome. And second question is a book recommendation.
Again, no favourites, but right here, right now, I would say Wild Swans. It's not a recent book, but it's a book about the lived experiences of 3 generations of women in China.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. Well, where'd you come across that before?
It's recommended to me, but I don't. I do my own sort of music discovery, but everything else is on recommendation.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Awesome. The final question. I'll get it up here.
This is from my predecessor. Is that right? Or one of my predecessors?
Sometimes it is. This one was from one of the listeners of the show.
Okay.
And this one comes in from Caleb, who asks, what is the wildest thing you discovered about yourself and your self-discovery journey?
The wildest thing I discovered about myself? Probably. Well, I'll tell you what I think it is, actually. It's not being as sensible as I once thought I was. I actually thought that deep down I was a sensible person, but I actually do enjoy the wild side. It's not just the ADHD or this or that.
You kind of just...
I like stage diving and mosh pits, genuinely, rather than it's just like a release.
I wonder if that was a part that you kind of had to repress time back to earlier, because you had kind of formed this image of the intelligent, smart guy who goes into corporate life.
That's a timely question.
Well, I think it's awesome that you've integrated that, and you are the fullest expression of yourself.
Thank you, man.
As you've alluded to. So, yeah, David, this has been awesome.
So,
where can people find you if they're interested in the work that you're doing? Maybe they want to book a gig in London.
You can type in David Chernick to Google. You can go on treacle.com, treacl.com/objection. If you are in any part of your life, but particularly if you're in business and somebody tells you they want to think about it, or I'm going to get some other quotes first, or it's a bit more than I was hoping to spend, or I'm not quite sure it's the right thing for me, I need to speak to my partner first, that will give you in 1 hour for free the ability to overcome any of those objections. If they want to have a gig, well, for that, they're probably going, if they want me to DJ their gig, they're probably going to have to get a referral from somebody I've DJ'd for. But Google me, find me on Facebook, David Chernick, CHERNICK.
We'll put all these links in the description.
Oh, and if I can also put a little plug, Krav Maga, self-defense, amazing philosophy. Also my third obsession, that is. So.
How long have you been doing that for?
Actually, I can tell you, usually I'm not very good at adding up dates and times and knowing my age and stuff like that, but I know that this last Sunday, was my 10th anniversary of being with this particular federation I'm with, Krav Maga Yuri Raffaelli. So I don't know how long I've been doing it, but 10 years at this place.
What made you start that interest?
I mean, gym is nice for some people. Running is nice for cycling is nice for some people. I like fighting.
Me too.
Yes,
Awesome.
you do. We have to train together.
Yeah. That'd be awesome. Cheers, David.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.